Today, the House of Representatives finishes up their task of programming the American war machine. Members are currently slogging through 172 amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act, a bill that sets the guidelines for how our military functions. Now, some of these amendments that are under consideration are very important. They work to address serious problems with our current war footing all around the world. For example, a team of Democrats have put forward an amendment to completely close the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay by the end of 2014. And there are two amendments brought by Republicans to weaken the power of our military to indefinitely detain American citizens. And there's even one amendment that ends indefinite detention for any individual currently in custody under the authorization for use of military force. And there's also an amendment by Congressman Keith Ellison to prohibit the transfer of tear gas and other riot control items to nations in the Middle East and North Africa that are currently undergoing democratic uprisings. Plus, there are provisions to keep the president committed to the withdrawal timeline in Afghanistan, provisions to post the true costs of our wars online, and a provision to allow undocumented immigrants to enlist in the military and have access to permanent residency within the United States thereafter. So these are all relevant. They address real-world concerns. They're serious amendments. But remember, we're dealing with a Congress that has an approval rating hovering around the 15% mark. That's about on par with BP's approval rating during their 2010 oil spill fiasco. So naturally, there are a few bizarro amendments to be considered today as well for the war machine. And here are the top three. First, brought to us by Congressman Dennis Ross, Amendment number 62 prohibits the Department of Defense from using taxpayer funds to provide additional or upgraded recreational facilities for individuals detained at Guantanamo Bay Detention Facility. Congressman Ross has been out of shape about plans to build a soccer field at Gitmo, saying back in 2012, quote, "Gitmo should not be a place of comfort. It should house the worst of the world's terrorists, not be a training ground for the World Cup." Congressman Ross is also against closing the facility and giving prisoners their fair trial. So when asked, can we at least improve the conditions there for the more than 100 prisoners who are on a hunger strike, many of whom have done absolutely nothing wrong and are cleared for release, Congressman Ross, well, he'd rather not. And then there's Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann's amendment number 127, which requires the POW MIA flag be flown 365 days a year on certain federal buildings. Because, you know, it's just much easier to fly a flag for prisoners of war than actually do something about our continuous military operations around the world that produce POWs and produce missing soldiers. And finally, there's Amendment number 115, straight from the Cold War era, brought to us by Representative Cynthia Loomis, as well as Congressman Steve Daines and Kevin Cramer. It requires the Department of Defense to preserve currently active intercontinental ballistic missile silos in warm status. Warm status meaning fully staffed and functional, just in case we need to deploy our entire nuclear arsenal at a moment's notice, an act that would quite literally kill every living thing on the planet. So, great idea, guys. So yeah, that's what Congress is working on. And if you think there's no way that any of these bizarro amendments will pass out of the House today, just remember, this is an institution that's less popular than cockroaches. In Washington, Sam Sachs, RT.